Hello and welcome to another maddening episode of What's Happening, or What Happened, the investigative YouTube-style pop culture media show that combs the wasteland for the wildest stories in the video game industry. And really, it's been a while since I've uncovered a tale as twisted as the development of Mad Max, the 2015 open-world action game from Avalanche Studios, and everyone's favorite publisher that's never mishandled their properties, not even once, WB Games. I had always heard that this particular title had some vague issues, like the early timeline and circumstances of its inception being somewhat muddy, as well as getting hit by a lengthy delay which resulted in a very unfortunate release date. But it was only recently where a key member of the development staff spoke about the project publicly in the wake of the newly released Furiosa film. Even with new information though, this tale of the wasteland is still somewhat mysterious, but hopefully we can dust off some of the sand obscuring its creation. So grab your boomsticks, rev your engines, and witness me as I answer the question, what happened to Mad Max 2015?
That's bait.
Ever since what I can charitably describe as the divisive reaction to 1985's Beyond Thunderdome, the Mad Max franchise was left to waste away on the side of the road throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Its creator and director, George Miller, had moved on to more family-friendly fare like the Babe films, along with some overly positive penguins I'll get to in a second. There was an attempt to bring it back though via a PS2 sequel to Beyond Thunderdome called Mad Max Asylum that, despite a passionate pitch by developer Melbourne House, George Miller ultimately passed on. However, with the success of Happy Feet, yeah, George directed that, he decided it might be best to bring Max back via the magic of animation rather than live action. But then in 2008, George was introduced to a game developer by the name of Dan Graff, who wanted to push George to give video games a second shot by playing Shadow of the Colossus in front of him, which, is a pretty convincing argument. The plan then became to co-develop the animated movie and video game adaptation at the same time, and as luck would have it, a very prominent figure in the games industry would become available. God of War 2 director Cory Barlog left Sony Santa Monica to pursue other interests, and soon found himself having in-depth conversations with George on how to craft a video game return for Max, as his last outing, the NES one, was fondly remembered by nobody. Unfortunately, this is where things got a bit messy. Starting a big video game project from scratch without a proper team or publisher in place would take time, far longer than making an animated CGI film, so the brakes were pumped until both projects could be better aligned. Meanwhile, Warner Brothers then approached George to helm a Justice League film called Justice League Mortal, which got really far into pre-production, including costume design and casting, but was then cancelled at the 11th hour in the wake of the success of The Dark Knight. This was due to the fact that WB execs now wanted to pivot the tone of their superhero films to be more in line with the Nolanverse, rather than something too comic booky, I guess. And since Justice League was still in pre-production, they felt it simpler to just shut the whole thing down, rather than, film it. Fucking WB, man. So with that project now pulled from under him and the Mad Max game still not in full development, George decided he needed a quick hit in the interim, and had the animation house he founded, Dr. D Studios, immediately launch into developing Happy Feet 2, which unfortunately meant that the Mad Max animated film would have to go on the back burner. Even more unfortunately than that though, the second Happy Feet did not find the same success the first Dancing Penguin movie enjoyed, barely posting a profit against its pretty sizable $135 million price tag. This flop actually killed Dr. D Studios, as they went bankrupt shortly thereafter, which meant the animated return of Mad Max would never come to fruition. Thankfully, George did prepare for this at some point along the way, using ideas and elements of the animated movie to become Fury Road, which, is worthy of its own What Happened episode. But hell, I can't even do that story justice, so just pick up Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road, cause yeah, it's absolutely crazy. I'll just stick with the video game for now because we still have a very sudden exit, a complete restart, and one of the worst release dates of all time to get to. In 2010, WB Games, probably through their connections to George, gained the rights to the Mad Max franchise, and the project shifted over to Avalanche Studios, best known for the Just Cause series. Cory Barlog was retained as a consultant on the project, while he also worked as the creative director on Happy Feet 2, the game. Yes, this actually happened, which probably actually explains why that thing is actually low-key fire. Anyway, Cory didn't stay on as a consultant for Mad Max for very long before joining Crystal Dynamics and then returning to Sony Santa Monica to direct Dad of War. This next part of the story, though, is, fractured, you could say. Some sources say there were actually two Mad Max games being developed, the one Cory started and the one Avalanche started, while others say they were one and the same. Avalanche's co-founder, Christopher Sunderberg, stated in an online interview that both Avalanche and Barlog were caught between two superpowers, that being WB Games and George Miller himself, who seemed to be at odds on exactly what the game should be. In my personal opinion, after combing through various sources and hints, I feel that the game was at one point supposed to be the adaptation of Fury Road, but when it shifted over to Avalanche and WB Games, there was a soft reboot, where it was designed to be its own standalone thing. This was semi-confirmed in a later VentureBeat interview with WB producer Peter Wise, who said they preferred to make games based off the properties themselves rather than a direct adaptation of a specific work, a lesson they learned on Arkham and Shadow of Mordor. And in that same VentureBeat interview, Chris Sunderberg went into detail about how much Avalanche loved the Mad Max franchise, and how excited they were to finally enter that world. We talked to Warner Brothers for quite a long time about different games, different projects. Every game you work on starts differently. But when we worked on a concept for a Western game, for example, we always referred back to Mad Max. It's the lone hero in the wasteland and so on. When we worked on post-apocalyptic concepts before, likewise, we always referred to Mad Max. One day, the business development people at Warner Brothers called us up and asked if we wanted to work on a Mad Max game. Obviously, we jumped on the opportunity. So while it's great that the developers had such enthusiasm for the source material, things unfortunately went sideways from there. When the game was rebooted to become its own thing outside of the film, Avalanche put together a solid pitch with concept art and laid out the themes and types of gameplay they hoped to include, which of course placed importance on open world mayhem befitting of the wasteland savagery. Here is where the recent tweets by Sunderberg come into play, as he alleges the producers at Warner Brothers, for whatever reason, fought back against the open world structure, instead wanting it to become a strictly linear experience with predetermined levels and set pieces. The team at Avalanche were obviously taken aback by this. Open world destruction was what they excelled at, but ultimately WB was still the boss, so they had to shift the mission and world design heavily to adhere to a more straightforward A to B structure. Avalanche was provided pre-production art from Fury Road during this time, getting to incorporate the even more over-the-top faction and vehicle design that George was cooking up. Avalanche then worked on this iteration of Mad Max for a full year, sometime between 2011 to 2012, and things seemed to be going rather smoothly, which I said in a specific tone to let you know that wasn't going to last. According to Sunderberg, leadership at WB Games then decided to take a very drastic and costly backpedal. After the first year of development, they realized they had forced us to make a linear experience rather than the open world game we pitched. We threw away a year of work and got to hear that players want autonomy in this day and age. Well, no shit. the entire game was then put on pause for Avalanche to spend time regrouping and figuring out how to salvage a whole year of work and expand it back out to an open world, which, as you can imagine, must have been pretty detrimental to the whole project. Other things changed during this process as well, as Mad Max was originally supposed to release in 2014 and be a cross-generation title on Xbox 360 and PS3, in addition to next-gen versions on PC, Xbox One, and PS4. But with a year wasted and now having to support an open world, the previous gen versions died historic on the Fury Road, getting cancelled outright before they were ever publicly shown. To be fair though, if this was going to be anything like the hilarious 360 and PS3 versions of Shadow of Mordor, it was probably for the best. What was not for the best, in a very specific way though, was a lengthy delay from 2014 to 2015, which was another factor that many feel, including Sunderberg himself, was a massive blunder which made very little sense, even in a world gone mad. Any game's publisher is ultimately in control of the final release date, and WB Games wanted Mad Max out on September 1st, 2015, which placed it several months behind the summer release of Fury Road. This was a problem for two reasons. One, given all the problems Fury Road had in development and the fact that the last Mad Max adventure was in 1985, there was some doubt that the sequel would do well in theaters, both critically and commercially. So, when Fury Road absolutely obliterated pretty much every action movie from the last 20 years or so, the pressure was now on Avalanche's game to follow up on that in a big way, a pressure that would have been absent had it been released in 2014 as originally scheduled. The second, and probably more important factor as to why releasing on the day it did was a bad idea, was that it was the same day as the hotly anticipated swan song of Hideo Kojima's final Metal Gear Solid game, The Phantom Pain. According to Sunderberg, Avalanche pleaded with WB execs to not release their open-world action title that largely took place in a desert environment against another, far more popular open-world action game that largely took place in a desert environment. Remember, Konami had announced its split with Kojima all the way back in March that same year, so not only was another anticipated entry in a world-renowned franchise coming out, it was being heralded and hyped as the last one Kojima would ever make. So it's no surprise that The Phantom Pain managed to become the third best-selling game for that month in North America according to NPD numbers, while Max barely hung on at number 3, and I can't find any solid numbers for it beyond that. Sunderberg, however, believes this stubborn refusal to shift the release date caused the slow sales and the cancellation of additional content. As we were forced to release Mad Max on the same day as MGS, they blamed us for the bad sales and canceled a bunch of awesome DLC that was just sitting there, waiting to be released. Unfortunately, he did not go into details about what this DLC actually was, but whatever it may have been, it could have only have improved the game. Mad Max excelled in most areas. Impressive graphics, rock-solid performance, over-the-top action including in-depth car combat, and a clear love for the source material, but it was also criticized in almost as many areas. Some outlets took issue with the reliance on the Ubisoft style of open-world design, which largely revolved around repetition, forcing the player to clear out dozens upon dozens of strongholds across the wasteland to progress. Mad Max also took some flack for its basic and not always engaging story, and borrowing a lot of elements from other well-established franchises like the Arkham combat system that many had grown tired of by 2015. Still though, for having the baggage of being a licensed game, the behind-the-scenes turmoil, and having to follow up on the incredible Fury Road, things could have, and by all measures should have gone a lot worse. In recent years, a pretty sizable contingent of fans have rediscovered Mad Max as it definitely fits the criteria of being a bit of a rough diamond. And since the IP is owned by Warner Brothers, it's remained available across all formats since its release, with the PC version regularly going on deep sale over on Steam. As for Avalanche, well, they would return to the wasteland in a way as they went on to co-develop Rage 2 with id Software, which, when you think about it, isn't much of a leap. In fact, the similarities between both may have contributed to some confusion a few years back, when a random actress straight out raw tweeted that they were being scanned at Avalanche's New York offices for their inclusion in a Mad Max 2 video game. The time, however, of the original tweet makes it much more likely this was actually a scan for Rage 2, so either she was confused or intentionally misinformed. In fact, it was George Miller's recent public dissatisfaction with the 2015 game that led him to state he would only want Hideo Kojima to make a new one, although he'd be too bashful to actually approach him about the possibility. This headline is what spurred Christopher Sunderberg to pipe up and defend the game Avalanche created over the course of 5 years, citing George's ignorance of the project's difficulties that were mainly caused by WB Games' mismanagement. Although Chris was quick to note that there is no ill will between him, George Miller, or Hideo Kojima, just that he felt Avalanche and their work was being unfairly represented. As for Sunderberg himself, well, he moved on from Avalanche after Rage 2 to establish Liquid Sword Games, cool name, who are currently hard at work on a, as of yet, unannounced title. So yeah, good stuff, WB Games. As of right now, there is zero evidence that a new Mad Max video game is coming anytime soon by anyone, but you never know. In a few months, or more likely years, we might be riding once again shiny and chrome on the highways to Valhalla. And if you know of any other feral, high-octane stories of the video game or movie industries, let me know in the comments below or enter the Thunderdome that is my social media. See you next time, bloodbags, and thanks for watching.